So, hello everybody, and welcome to our interview once again with Reset Revolution. My name is Katoha Kudo, and today we're going to be interviewing Malu from Brazil, from Sao Paulo. She currently attends graded, but do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Malu. I'm a junior right now, attending graded in São Paulo, and our discussion topic today is the misconceptions and the ideas people have about autism and Asperger's. And as a person who has this condition, I just wanted to spread awareness and educate. Yeah.
That sounds great. Okay, anyways, welcome to the interview today. So before we go into it, I just want to say what Reset Revolution is. We're a group of high school students that are determined to shed more awareness and more light towards social justice issues by interviewing people, mostly people around our age, so high school students like Malu herself. So if you'd like to stay updated about these works, please go follow us on Instagram or go follow us on our YouTube channel. Anyways, going back to our topic today, which, as Malu mentioned earlier, is the misconceptions of what a person with Asperger's should look like or should be like. And we will be having a conversation about autism itself. But Malu, would you mind, before we actually get to the interview, could you describe a little bit about what Asperger's and autism is?
Yeah, so essentially, autism or autism spectrum disorder, usually shortened to ASD, is what people might consider a learning disability or like a social disability, where basically autistic people usually act and see the world differently from a normal neurotypical person, which is like somebody who doesn't have anything like ADHD or autism or anything like that. So the way they interact and respond to the world is very different from someone who's neurotypical. So, for example, somebody might not really understand the difference between like sarcasm and normal conversations. So, that is usually something that might be affected in relation to a person. And sometimes they might not even be able to like properly speak or speak at all. So, it really depends on how severe each person's autism or Asperger's is.
Mm-hmm. So you said earlier that you also have the diagnosis of Asperger's, but could you mention a little bit about how it affects you and what Asperger's means to you personally?
So Asperger's essentially is a type of autism. It falls into the autism spectrum disorder, and it's more mild to me. Like when people see me, it's like almost not noticeable at all. Like nobody really can tell that I have it personally, so it's not like something that hugely affects my life, but it's definitely something that affects me. So like personally, I find it very hard sometimes to comprehend when someone's being sarcastic or joking with me and what sort of intentions they have.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's sort of like I don't really know what's going on half the time, but I'm doing my best.
What are some memorable personal experiences that you possibly might have felt isolated because of your diagnosis with Asperger's and because of your condition in general?
So one time that really stands out to me is like fifth grade. So this was when I used to live in Shanghai, and I had like the 2 years prior, I had both of my best friends leave me because they had to like move like from country to country. So it really wasn't their fault. And so for me, it's really hard to make new friends and to socialize with people because like I'm already a little bit awkward, but like I just find it difficult to talk to people at times because I don't really know what's going on and I can't understand really how they're speaking to me. Like, are they being serious? Am I supposed to be like more giggly and stuff? Like, so it's just a question of how do I communicate with a person. And so in fifth grade, my favorite teacher also left. I felt like I had a really good connection with her. So I basically had no friends and I was really alone. And for me, I didn't really understand how to go about talking to the people in my grade because I just felt so out of it. And I felt kind of like an alien, essentially. And it was really bad.
Yeah, I bet. I'm really sorry that happened. So you said you said earlier that you lived in Shanghai, and that all of this experience happened in fifth grade. Now that you're in 11th grade, how has this condition, at least for you personally, how has it progressed over the years, and how has it affected you differently now?
So for me, I've kind of become better at talking to people. Like I'm naturally more like outgoing and like easy to talk with. Like I like people tell me I'm approachable anyway, but I think I've gotten better at like interpreting social cues and knowing like when someone might be joking and when someone might not be joking. So for me, it's easier to talk to people because I kind of know what's going on more, but I still struggle with like tone through
Mm-hmm.
text. Like through text, it's kind of really hard for me to tell when they're just being serious or not. And like I don't really know what people's intentions are half of the time. Like I'm very scared of like being hurt, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely understandable. So, in terms of personal challenges, how did you learn to accept your condition, and what specifically like encouraged you to accept who you were and the condition itself as a person?
So I actually haven't really gotten diagnosed
Mm,
with the condition until I was like 13. So, because
mhm,
usually, like with autism, boys are diagnosed at a much earlier age, whereas girls are diagnosed later. So, 13, I was already in like eighth grade, going
mhm,
into ninth maybe. So, I knew I had something little like slightly different about me. Like I knew I I'm not like other people kind of thing. But well, yeah, like I just felt like I was a little bit different from other people. Like a good metaphor that I heard when I went to a doctor once was it's like I'm in a world full of dogs and I'm like a cat, for example. So
mm,
it's a little bit hard for me to like get around, but I still like I'm still good at like talking to people and making friends. It's just I have a little bit of a harder time. And I'm also naturally slower at things, whether it's through like learning. Like I have to be more thorough, I guess you could say.
mhm, mhm. So that's how I guess Asperger's affects you. But have people treated you differently because of what you have?
A lot of people I know, just in general, they use a lot of the R slur.
Mm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
to me, I feel I feel a little bit upset because as a person with this disability, I'm like, hey, that's not cool. Like
mm-hmm,
people like, oh, you're so R slur, and I'm like, no, because as a person with a disability, I think I'm pretty smart, even though I have difficulties and like
mm-hmm,
talking to people, and I'm a little bit slow when it comes to understanding stuff. I
mm-hmm,
think I'm pretty smart. Like I do good in school, and I can do a lot of things, and I'm really dedicated. So I think when you say something like that, it's kind of upsetting, and
mm-hmm.
it makes me and it puts and it's almost as if you're putting people who have mental disabilities at a lower level
Hmm.
than you.
Yeah, it's understandable and it's reasonable for you to get upset. And I think the term itself wasn't really considered, I guess, to be a slur until I think very recently, or at least within the public's mind. Like people only started to know that it was like, it was bad. Like it was, you couldn't say that. And people didn't know like as to why until literally this year. So it's obviously something that people definitely should start talking about more. But as you said earlier, you said the condition itself maybe has like it takes you more time to thoroughly grasp new things, new concepts. But how has graded accommodated you in terms of like learning and other stuff?
I think teachers in general are very thorough and very good at explaining. Like it
Mm-hmm,
goes through a step-by-step guide on how to do something and
mm-hmm,
what something is and what it means. However, sometimes if I don't understand like every little thing, like I take down color coded notes so I have better understanding and I process things better. but like if something is going wrong, I get super anxious, and it's not like even like normal. I like start getting super angry and super frustrated. So I think just virtual learning and school in general is easy. It's just I'm very like I'm already very emotional because when you're autistic, everything is sort of amplified.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's like your senses, so like I'm very sensitive to sound, or whether it's like my emotions, I feel everything super intensely.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm anxious about a test, I'm going to be like super anxious. I'm gonna be in tears.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna like not want to do it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's awful.
So the media, right? I think a media part plays a big like role in today's society, especially within our generation. I think the media has altered society's perception of people that are on the spectrum and have Asperger's or are autistic.
God, where do I even begin? So I think a lot of like social media portrays the autism spectrum as something that's bad. Like there's so many misconceptions when it comes to like vaccines. That's a big one, where it's like if you give your children vaccines, they're gonna become autistic, and then people don't want to give their children vaccines because of that, which to me is like, if your child is autistic, like I think autistic people can do so many amazing things. Like Susan Boyle, she was like this X Factor, I think, just some singing competition person who auditioned, and people were like, oh, she's not gonna sing very well, blah blah blah. And she had such an incredible voice, and people loved her, and she had Asperger's syndrome. Somebody else that has Asperger's syndrome is Greta Thunberg.
Mm-hmm.
Greta Thunberg. Who's like, as we know, is super famous and is a Swedish climate activist around our age, and she has Asperger's syndrome, and she sees it as her superpower because she thinks that her autism makes her much more passionate about. And when you're autistic, since everything is amplified, your interests and your passions in what you do become super amplified as well. So I think even with your disability, when you're good at something, you're like super dedicated and really good at it. Like you're not gonna stop talking about it. It's just amazing.
In terms of misconceptions that you talked about earlier with vaccines, are there any other misconceptions that people have about being on the spectrum or having Asperger's syndrome that you might want to address?
People think, like, even like just in general when you have a disability, but I think in particular with like autism, they expect you to look a certain way. So a lot of people, when you think about a disability, people are like, oh, this poor person, they're like ugly or whatever and stuff, and I'm like, what? No. i think I think people in general are I think people in general are so beautiful, and I think we should all accept each other despite our differences. And I think we should just love each other for who we are, even though we have these differences, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. Everybody should be loved, you know.
That's actually a really, really nice phrase that you use there. It's very memorable, and I think it's a very good message to tell to the world.
Thank you.
So I think this is going to be the last question, but what are your hopes for the future in terms of this topic and the misconceptions of what people have about those that are on the spectrum or those that have Asperger's syndrome?
Some of my biggest hopes that I hope people integrate more into their lives, I think, is just don't talk to somebody with a disability like as if they're lower than you. I think you should talk to them eye to eye as if they're an equal, because they're still human, even though they do have this like a disability. So I think just learning how to properly communicate, because to me communication is so important because I already struggle with it. So I think communication with a person in general, but especially with a person who has a disability is so important. And I think once you are able to communicate and understand how they function and how they go through their day-to-day lives, I think it's just so important for you, because it will not only be helpful for the person to feel better, but it will also make you feel good because you feel like you're doing something nice for them. So yeah, just treat us nicely and don't think of us as like aliens or whatever. And
yeah. That's, I think I really like how you like connected it back to like the 5th grade alienness, isolation that you felt, that you talked about earlier. But I think that's a very nice way to end this interview. So thank you very much, Malu, for joining us today. And for everybody that is watching in the audience right now, even though this is pre-recorded, thank you so much for joining us. It really means a lot from me, as well as obviously Malu as well, that you are all watching us just talk about this. And for our next event, I will actually be holding another interview with Sarah Moralski from ISB, so Brussels, and we'll be talking about education for girls in India and her research, as well as her personal experience on the topic. So go check that out as well. And thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Malu.
Bye.
Bye.